Hi, it's Tim Grant.
And Nicci McLeod from the Right and Wrongs podcast. This is a very special episode where we are crossing over with another successful Aston Originals podcast from the Department of Communication and Culture. That is CorpusCast.
We're welcoming the host of CorpusCast and talking about some of the ways corpus linguistics and forensic linguistics intersect.
As ever, listeners may find some topics distressing as we will be dipping back into previous episodes that refer to rape, terrorism, murder, but we hope you enjoy the show.
Season 2 Postscript, Righting Wrongs meets CorpusCast.
Hello and welcome to Righting Wrongs, the podcast from AIFL, the Aston Institute for Forensic Linguistics at Aston University. We're all about improving the delivery of justice through the analysis of language. I'm Professor Tim Grant.
And I'm Dr Nicci McLeod, Deputy Director of AIFL. So Tim, this is a bit of a departure from our usual type of episode. What are we up to today?
So firstly, we're not the only podcast that comes out of Aston University or even out of our department, the Department of Communication and Culture. And one thing we've wanted to do for a while is showcase some of the other great podcasting our colleagues have done and some of them are continuing to do. So over the course of our 2 series of Righting Wrongs, we've had quite a few mentions of corpus linguistics, and we've tried to explain what corpus linguistics is and talked about how corpus linguistics provides a set of methods useful for a range of forensic linguistic tasks. And so we thought we'd invite in a real expert in corpus linguistics, our colleague and the host of CorpusCast, Dr Robbie Love.
Robbie is a senior lecturer in English language and linguistics here at Aston. His expertise is in corpus linguistics and he's programme director for the BA Digital Media and Communication. He's also Associate Dean for Education and Student Experience for the School of Law and Social Sciences. And he was, of course, host of CorpusCast from 2022 to 2024. We're absolutely delighted to have you here, Robbie.
Hello. It's wonderful to be here on Righting Wrongs. I am so excited, a big fan. And yes, you are sort of coming straight after a 3-year run of CorpusCast, also on Aston Originals, interviewing, there were 36 episodes in total over the 3 years, interviewing corpus linguists from all around the world about the fascinating things they do, including you, of course, Tim, in one of our early episodes.
Yes. I can't remember what the episode number was, but I appeared with Lucia Busso, one of our colleagues, talking about forensic linguistics, and it gave me a little taste for podcasting that may have been a seed that transformed into Righting Wrongs. Let's say that's the origin story of Righting Wrongs. Yeah,
that's right. Well, of course, we don't produce CorpusCast at present anyway, but I'm so happy that Righting Wrongs is carrying on really where we left off with producing podcasts from the department and from the Institute.
Brilliant. So what we're going to do today is jump back into some key moments from the 2 series of Righting Wrongs where corpus linguistics has cropped up during our discussions. And we're going to revisit those discussions and hear the perspective of our corpus linguist, Robbie, to maybe add a bit of depth to our listeners' understanding around this area of linguistic and this kind of linguistic method. And of course, Nicci and I both wholly endorse CorpusCast. So if you've not heard CorpusCast before, please go and listen to the back catalogue there and you can find out much more for yourselves.
Okay, so let's kick things off. We want to start with some talk around the very early days of corpus linguistics. So we're going to listen to a clip. So this is Tim and Professor Malcolm Coulthard, who, of course, has appeared on the series before. And they're talking about the beginnings of CoBuild and the Bank of English at the University of Birmingham.
I'm sure all of you have access to desktop printers which can read text and turn it into an electronic form. One of the problems in the early days of corpus linguistics was that didn't exist. All text had to be typed in manually. And the head of the linguistics in Birmingham, one called John Sinclair, managed to get money from the Collins publishers to create a dictionary. And he got money to create this corpus, which was the collection of texts. But What he needed was a way of reading in text electronically. And as I say, the desktop printer reader didn't exist. He managed to get the first text reader in Britain. It came from Germany. It cost almost £100,000. It took 3 days to learn each new font. So imagine with your little printer, you just put a piece of paper on it and it reads it. This machine had to learn, and it took 3 days to learn each new font. Because it was so expensive, teams of slave students were working 24 hours a day, feeding the machine with text. And after about 4 months, we had 1,500,000 words. That was an amazing achievement at the time. And the fact that I could analyze this 1,500 words and come out with an observation about then was a major achievement. Now, as Tim says, you'll be looking at billions of words.
Yeah. And as one of those students who had to stay up at 4 a.m, I can attest to the fact there were bottles of wine involved and also a scanning device. It didn't have a name, really. It was called a text reader, but it was what we'd think of today, I guess, as a scanner or something. It filled up half a room.
Yes. Right.
And today I can point my phone at a text and it will digitize it for me. It was just that bit of the whole process. So this makes us all seem very old, I guess, these kind of anecdotes.
So 2 senior linguists there discussing
Thank you, Nicci.
A very different life for the corpus linguist back in the day. So yeah, very different life for the corpus researcher. So can you sort of talk us through what's changed, Robbie?
Well, quite a lot has changed, as you can imagine. I'll start with what Malcolm was referring to there with this scanning device and learning these different fonts, etc. Really, this is known as optical character recognition, where we can digitize texts that were printed originally and then they're scanned and turned into electronic form. Regardless of the original source of a text, the getting it into an electronic form, of course, is essential for any kind of corpus analysis. So nowadays, this process can be done, of course, a lot quicker and at a much larger scale. But really, this only applies to texts that were originally printed. And of course, in some contexts, that is still necessary and a source of text and data that you would require. But of course, nowadays, so much of the language that we might be interested in a forensic context or any other linguistic context is born digital, so to speak. And so Malcolm referred to corpora of billions of words. These are typically not corpora that have been scanned from printed books, but rather scraped from the internet automatically. And so nowadays you can use software to build a huge corpus, much larger than the corpus Malcolm was talking about, in seconds or minutes. I mean, it's terrifying, really, but also quite exciting for linguistic research.
Yeah. So, Robbie, I know that you have a large part in building the spoken portion of the British National Corpus. Do you want to tell us about what collecting that looked like? Because obviously it's a different set of challenges.
Yeah. Spoken data is of course, a slightly different context, has its own unique challenges. Of course, you need to have a transcription of an original recording of the speech that you're interested in analysing. With the Spoken British National Corpus 2014, goodness, it's aging.
Another senior linguist.
It's starting to, it still feels like yesterday. So this was just sort of as automated transcription was starting to become a thing, but it was nowhere near reliable enough, even a few years ago to use. And so this was over 10 million words of recordings of members of the public having casual conversations. We recruited hundreds of people across the country to record themselves talking to each other, just recorded using their smartphones. And these were transcribed manually. And so you have a team of people who are trained on the particular conventions that you require. And of course, consistency of those conventions is essential for getting anything useful from the data when you come to analyzing it. And so that was 3 or 4 years of transcribing and preparing this data. Nowadays, researchers who are building spoken corpora are increasingly likely to at least semi-automate that process. So they might start with an automated transcription, which is then manually corrected, which may speed up the process a little bit overall.
So that's interesting. So it feels like sort of 20 years on or something like that, that the spoken corpus was much more manual as this was, because we, having gone through the text scanning device, we did have to do the corrections as well because it wasn't very accurate.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of manual input post scanning.
Yeah.
Even for the text.
And that explains historically why there are generally far more written corpora, and they are generally so much bigger than spoken corpora as well.
Yeah. So in that discussion with Malcolm, we talked about how the invention of corpora affected the ability of forensic linguists to do analysis, and specifically Malcolm's analysis in his work on the Derek Bentley case, the Derek Bentley witness statement. So let's hear just a little clip of that discussion.
So what you had that Svartvik didn't was corpus linguistics.
Exactly.
Yes. And this was a technology that was more or less invented at the University of Birmingham or at around the time you were doing your analysis. And there was this co-build corpus there, which was a dictionary project at the University of Birmingham. And I remember it well. It was housed in one of those old Victorian houses with lots of tiny rooms and lots of staircases and the rest of it. But the point is they had a massive corpus of 1.5 million words of spoken English. And Malcolm's laughing because our corpora that we would work with these days are trillions of words big. So it was sort of, though, the first big data analysis. So when you're quoting these figures, you're able to have looked at a form of analysis that wasn't available to Svartvik. He was only looking at comparing one bit of the statement with the other. So you've got 2 or 3 comparisons you can do. You can compare Bentley's statement with other lay witness statements, with other police witness statements, which are apparently good, undisputed, and also with the general background of the big co-build corpus, the Bank of English, as it was called.
Bank of English, indeed,
yeah?
Yes.
That Bank of English corpus. And against all of those, you were able to say that this I then was typical of police language and untypical of other languages. You were establishing base rate knowledge, I guess.
That's right, yes, yeah. And we were saying that this supposedly unaided statement has a significant stylistic feature which occurs in police reports but doesn't occur in ordinary lay texts.
So the 2 cases that come up in that clip with Malcolm are the Timothy Evans case, where the analysis was done by Jan Svartvik, and the Bentley case. And we're pointing to the differences that Malcolm had corpus. He had corpora to do the comparison with. And what he actually did was he was looking at the relation of the subject to the word then. And he did that by literally extracting all the thens from the corpus and running his finger down a keyword in context list and working out whether the subject was before or after the word then. So it was computer assisted, but there was a lot of manual analysis involved as well. And so Coulthard's language, this was that he was looking for the post-positioned then. So I then versus the pre-positioned then I, which Svartvik wrote up as a mobile relator. So this kind of low-level syntactic analysis, what does contemporary corpus linguistics, how would you approach a problem like that?
Well, in this context, not too dissimilarly. I mean, yes, corpus linguistics continues to evolve, but the foundational principles, if you will, to do with observing patterns over large collections of texts, and of course, this often has a quantitative element to varying degrees. Those ideas have not really changed, and sometimes a very simple analysis procedurally can be very illuminating if the data that you're working with is of good quality and allows you to make the sorts of comparisons you're interested in. And so in this case, we're interested in then I and I then being found to be unusually frequent, relatively, in this highly specialized register of language, which is these police statements, compared to general English. And then taking this individual statement and which is not supposedly from written by the police, and noticing that this particular stylistic feature has cropped up much more often than you'd expect compared to how lay people tend to use language. This is a comparison based on frequency, and it's a fairly simple comparison, but one that in this case is very illuminating, and it reflects the fact that registers, so different types of text that can be defined according to the sorts of linguistic features that are perhaps more frequent than average, based on the function of those texts, and how different text types vary and have different frequencies of features, can be really, really helpful in this kind of work. You wouldn't really approach that specific question that differently nowadays. What you probably would do differently is not necessarily just look at one feature in isolation, but rather take a broader quantitative and statistical approach. For instance, something called multidimensional analysis, where you chuck loads of features into the pot all at once and compare all their frequencies relative to each other to get a broader profile of variability. But the principle remains the same.
Yeah, and I guess the other automation that is now much more reliable would be marking up the text for parts of speech. Mm-hmm. So you could easily pull out the nouns and pronouns and their adjacency one way or the other to the word then, rather than do that by eyeball. Yeah.
Yes, of course. We can automatically annotate, as it's known, corpora according to any and all kind of linguistic descriptive categories, including the word class or part of speech. And then you can search for those labels, which is essentially what they are, and retrieve every instance of a particular kind of word all in one go, which can certainly help to speed things up.
Sure. So there's much more ability to automate, but I think it does come back down to that linguist looking at what those results are too. It's always the case, isn't it?
Yeah. With concordancing, it's largely very similar to how it's been for a long time. That the principle of searching for something and manually combing through individual instances of that thing and working out what's going on.
So let's move on to another case. We're going to hear from Izzy Clark talking about our work on the Karvanakis case. This was a terrorism case where a bomb was found in Princes Street Gardens in Edinburgh. And this led to a Mexican eco-anarchist website and various linguistic analyses, and then to a Greek individual living in Edinburgh.
We looked across all the texts. We merged all the lists of 1 grams from all the different texts into one big kind of master 1 gram list, and the same for the biograms and the 3 grams and the 4 grams. We then searched through each text, so each of the authors in the Paroxysm of Chaos 1 and 2 and the known text, and we said, are any of these in that particular text? So is the biogram in any of those authors' texts? Then we were looking for engrams that did co-occur across the disputed text and Archigonos' text. And then we want to explore whether these are characteristic of perhaps the Greek native language, so perhaps they weren't as distinctive as maybe we thought we were. So in order to do that, we compared it against a large data set of Learner English, and this data set we call a corpus, and it's the International Corpus of Learner English. So corpus compiles lots of different texts, and this is a corpus that's dedicated to texts produced by learners of English, and they have a Greek component within that. So it's Greek learners writing in English. So we explored whether any of those engrams were shared between them.
So Izzy's talking there about 1 grams, bigrams, trigrams. What are we talking about here, Robbie?
So engrams, as they're known collectively, are sequences of running words of any defined length, n. So a 1 gram is simply a word on its own. A bigram or a 2 gram is any 2 words that run consequently, one after the other, in a corpus. And so you can search for these slots, if you will, of sequences of running words and count them. So if we have, the cat sat on the mat, the first trigram would be the cat sat on. The second trigram would be cat sat.
Hang on, that was 4-gram. The cat sat on.
Thank you.
Let's not edit that out.
Oh my God. What's 3, 4?
The cat sat.
Yeah, thank you. Oh my God. I think I knew something about this. Right. So if you were looking at the cat sat on the mat and the trigrams, the first trigram would be the cat sat. The second one would be cat sat on, etc. And then you can search for these and count them. And the purpose of this in this context is to look at what might be revealed as individual stylistic features of a particular author, as opposed to the norms that you'd expect across a larger sample, a representative sample of the population of speakers or writers. And n-grams can be helpful in revealing individual sort of combinations of words that may occur more or less frequently than you might expect, compared to a larger population of speakers or writers that perhaps have similar backgrounds, or you'd expect them to have similar styles of writing.
Yeah, and this is why we can use them in an authorship analysis, like in this case. And as he also mentions the sort of the specialised corpus, the international corpus of learner English, and particularly in this case, the Greek component that we extracted and used. Talk us through sort of some of these specialised corpora. What are the other uses? Because they're not developed for forensic purposes.
That's right. So to talk about specialised corpora, we compare this generally to general corpora, which is where you're trying to represent an entire variety of a language, typically at a national level, and it's really big and it's filled with lots of different types of texts and communicative context. A specialized corpus is much more narrowly defined. You're not trying to represent a language or a variety of language in general, but it's much more functionally defined according to a specific context. How is language used in this particular context by this particular kind of speaker? A learner corpus is the language of people who are learning a second language or an additional language. So a learner English corpus is speakers who their first language is a different language and they're learning English as a second or foreign language. That, in this particular case, was a close sort of approximation to the background of the author in question, comparing the variety of Greek English that was being used. And so it was used as a reference corpus to see how do Greek learners of English, on average, if you will, generally use these features, and how does this particular author use them as an individual?
Yeah, and we were interested in that because we were trying to make sure that we hadn't just picked up on Greek learner language, that it really was individual to Kavanaakis, and that's what that analysis showed.
So sticking with this theme of specialised corpora, what we're going to hear next is Tim and I in Series 2, Episode 7, talking about the creation of a specialised corpus. So when we've got a specific linguistic question about a specific language variety, how do we sort of tackle that question? And that's what this discussion's about.
And what this means is you build a corpus that's relevant to the case. Now, a corpus, we've said before, is a database of language. And in this case, what I wanted was to build a specialised grime community corpus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So where do you go to get one of them?
Well, fortunately for me, someone had invented the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And back in 2009, when I was doing this work, there was, and there still exists, an online forum for devotees of grime music called Grime Music Forum. Okay. So how we phrase this is that we scrape it. So I downloaded all the conversation from that forum into my language analysis software, my Corpus Tools software. I think I used Wordsmith Tools, which was the preferred software at the time. It's now we might well use other things. And what I can do is create what's called a keyword in context list. So this puts the term and it shows you the context of the use of that term either side.
Okay, also known as concordance lines.
And it's one of the initial exploratory methods about word meaning that you would use in corpus linguistics.
So it's not just about looking at existing corpora to sort of help us answer questions about language, but sometimes about creating our own.
Yeah, absolutely. And in this case, I imagine, as you were explaining, Tim, that you couldn't find an existing corpus of grime music or discussion around grime music or lyrics of grime music. So you had to build your own. And often specialized corpora are born out of necessity, where existing data doesn't exist, so you go off and create your own. And so, yes, this is a very specialized corpus in this case, not representative of broader linguistic usage, but it need not be in this particular case because you're interested in looking at how language was used in this very, very narrowly restricted context.
Yeah, and there's work that we've done together where we've built the corpus because it's those specific texts that we're interested in. So we did some work for the CPS looking at disproportionality in charging files, and obviously we needed to build the corpus ourselves from the texts that were provided because it was those texts themselves that were of interest to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And this really sort of brings to light one of the major challenges of designing and building any kind of corpus, which is the alignment of your research aims with the preparation of the data and also what's known as the representativeness of the corpus. We generally think of corpora as being some kind of sample from which you're perhaps generalizing to a broader population. A lot of corpora fall into that category. But sometimes you really, want to look at how do particular people use language in a particular context. And you're not interested in generalizing very far beyond that. But yes, so corpora can come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and sometimes absolutely it's necessary to build your own from scratch.
So we heard a bit there about concordance lines or keywords in context, and so we're going to hear a little bit more about that from the same pair of episodes actually. So Series 2, Episode 7.
So you've provided me with this corpus analysis that you've done, and I've got it in front of me on my screen here. And what you've got there is you've got these keyword in context lines that we discussed in part 1. I only had very few examples, in that case for the word duppy. You've got 20 or 30 examples of the use of the word killy here from Twitter. And you've separated these out into a set of examples where the word before the word killy is my killy, because this is what the corpus analysis software allows you to do. And then you've got another set of examples where it's you or your killy. And I can see a couple in there of my young killy and things like that. So there's a couple of variations of this. But the idea of doing a corpus analysis is you get lots of examples to determine the meaning of its word from its context in use. And this is what the concordance lines, the keyword in context lines, provide to you. So what did you draw from this?
Yes, absolutely. So the saying is you can tell the meaning of a word by the company it keeps, isn't it?
That's right.
So as we heard there, concordance lines or keywords in context show us all examples of a word and the context in which it appears in a corpus. So can you tell us a little bit more about the other tools that we might have at our disposal as a corpus linguist?
Yeah, absolutely. So concordancing, as you mentioned, is very helpful for looking through individual examples. But what happens if, unlike the case you just described, you don't just have 20 or 30 examples of a word, but you've got hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands, too many to look at manually. You need to take another approach. So, for instance, we can use statistical approaches known as association measures to look at the collocational patterns between a word and other words. What this is about is the co-occurrence. When a word you've searched for, you can look for words around that in sort of close proximity that occur very often. So you notice patterns of certain words appearing next to or close to each other much more often than perhaps you'd expect otherwise.
And we call those collocates, right?
Exactly, yes. So you can calculate, you can measure the collocates of a particular word, the words that appear really, really regularly close by to the word you're interested in. So that's a statistical approach which provides you with a list of collocates, and you can measure them in all sorts of different ways. And that can be really, really revealing, particularly if you're comparing how a word is used across different data sets and comparing the different collocates that might come up, which can give you a real, insight into differences in usage and different senses of a word.
So I think we're going to move on to our final clip.
Okay, so yes, and this is a discussion of myself and Andrea Nicci and his use of corpus linguistics in the analysis of a disputed retraction statement in the Ayia Napa rape case. So the young woman had made an allegation of rape, and then a couple of days later was re-interviewed, and a retraction statement came out of that interview, and she later claimed that it wasn't hers, it was written by the Cypriot police. So let's listen to that. We've already mentioned that you have an interest in corpus linguistics, and what you've said is you do a careful and close reading, and it's quite an intuitive process spotting these things that feel like they might discriminate between your two hypotheses of the native Greek-speaking police officer and the British-speaking young woman. What's the next step? So you've got these constructions. Where does the corpus come in?
Sometimes when reading these texts, it could be that we already, as linguists, we might have an intuition as to where the evidence is taking us. But at the same time, what we need to do is to also check whether these intuitions are correct. So in other words, attach some sort of confidence, possibly numerical confidence, to what we believe is correct. So in this case, for example, construction, doing sections intercourse is something that intuitively might sound as something that a native speaker of British English would not say, and quite likely to be correct, but we still want to test whether this is correct or not. And the way we would do that is by using bodies of text that we call corpora, this collection of text made up of millions and millions of words and millions of text nowadays. And we can use them as reference to determine whether these assumptions are correct or not.
So there was a big focus in that clip that we heard there on native speaker intuition and how using corpus methods can add a bit of scientific underpinning to that, because it's not always accurate.
Indeed, yes. One of the things that corpus linguistics has demonstrated time and time again is that our own individual intuitions about language are not very reliable at all. It doesn't mean that we're never in line with what you might observe from a corpus, but certainly not to be relied upon. And so yes, in this case, we're talking about using a corpus to check and test our own hypotheses and intuitions about language, because we are all individuals and we do not all use language uniformly, of course. And so it might be that you think that a certain construction or certain way of using a word is that in a way that you do is typical of lots of other speakers of your language, and then realize by looking at a corpus that represents that variety that perhaps you're a little bit of an outlier, and maybe you're not necessarily using the most typical form, so to speak. This is really helpful, because the difference is a researcher, in this case, coming across a particular construction, go, that's definitely evidence that someone else wrote this, because a British person would never use that construction, and just being, I know this because I'm a speaker of British English, as opposed to, okay, well, let's actually look at the data and see. You might find indeed that British people tend not to use that particular construction, or you might find that actually some of them do, which may weaken the sorts of claim that you're making, or your inference that you're making about the particular feature. So that's a very useful function of corpus data in general.
Yeah, very useful for avoiding the ipsy-dixit.
Yeah, one of my favourite phrases, ipsy-dixit expertise, because I say so. And it's what expert witnesses are not meant to do in court. They're meant to show the court the evidence, not rely on their own reputations as being, experts in this field. So ipsy-dixitism is to be avoided. So this just about brings this episode to a close, our postscript to season 2. And hopefully we've managed to shed some light on corpus methods in particular, So thank you so much, Robbie, for sharing your expertise with our listeners.
Yes, thanks, Robbie. And we cannot finish the show without saying that, without telling our wrong-uns out there, that Robbie is a keen and very gifted amateur actor who is going to be appearing in We Will Rock You at the Birmingham Hippodrome, 9th to the 13th of June. So do go and get your tickets now, wrong-uns.
Yes, and I have to say that our family went to your previous production of Les Mis, where you had a starring role, and that was fantastic. So I'm sure we're getting tickets to We Will Rock You as well.
You make me blush. But no, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
We couldn't let you go without raising that. So, as always, if you've got a question, remember you can get in touch with the show via email, writingwrongs@aston.ac.uk, or through our social media.
If you've been affected by any of the themes in this week's episode, please consider contacting the resources in the episode description.
This has been Writing Wrongs, an original podcast series from the Aston Institute for Forensic Linguistics at Aston University. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.